This discussion focuses on the first three artists in the creator section of your book. Those artists are Edvard Munch, Frida Kahlo, and Caravaggio. Now, we're going to talk about the four creator questions as they apply to these artists, but this is kind of the fast version of the lecture that we're doing in class. We're going to cover the things that you'll need to review for the test, but we're not going to talk about everything that we talked about in class. So if you missed the lecture, make sure that you get a friend's notes and fill those in your class book. We will hit the important things, though. Okay. The first artwork that you see here is Edvard Munch's The Scream. So you want to go ahead and write down the name of the artist and the name of the work of art here. And this is one that shows the little guy with the light bulb head.
On a bridge with an orange sky, right?
And we're going to answer two questions from the first page here. First, question number one, how did the artist's personal experiences influence this artwork? Okay. Should we just start with the basics?
Sure. I think what you want to know is we're going to answer two questions, actually. Question number one and question number two. What was Edvard Munch trying to do that was new?
Right.
And so that's how much room you need for this one slide. Question number one, what was the artist's personal experiences? And how do we see that in the painting?
Right. Okay, this guy is a glum man. I mean, he's
dark.
Really dark, and some people think that partly it's kind of the Norwegian personality. You know, Norway is a country where it's cold and wet a lot of the year, and there is this kind of introspection that's part of the Norwegian temperament. So sometimes people just think the fact that he's Norwegian is showing in this kind of dark, you know,
very dark. It was his life was surrounded by death.
Right.
I mean, his father was a doctor.
That's right. And this is the 19th century. So doctors in this time don't have all of the medical knowledge that we have today, all the resources and medicines, and frequently they ended up just trying to make people comfortable as they died.
Mm-hmm.
So Edvard Munch was just around death a lot, partly because of what his father did. But here's the real kicker. Tuberculosis was a terrible problem during the 19th century, and Munch's family was especially prone to this terrible disease. Now, all of us, we've been immunized to most strains of tuberculosis, but in this time, people are not immunized for tuberculosis, and this is a disease that causes your lungs to slowly decay. So Munch watched first his mother, when he was about 5 years old, die of tuberculosis, and then his older sister, who kind of filled in as a second mother for him, and she also died of tuberculosis. And what was his medical father able to do about this?
Nothing. He was very resentful.
Right, and in fact, his father believed that this was God's punishment to him. That he wasn't a good enough man, and so God had punished him by taking away these people that he loved so much. So there was a real, I mean, that just adds layers of suffering onto suffering, and that's a lot of what Munch experienced.
How do you see death in this painting? And obviously, first you can see the man who's in the middle of the picture. He looks like he's dead, like a skeleton of sorts.
Like a walking corpse.
A walking corpse.
Right. And then the world he's in is just this hellish world, you know, this blood-red sky, and you know, the chaos of the lines, and you know,
and even the water itself looks like it's out to get him and or whatever's out there in the world.
Right. Everything looks malicious and scary. Right.
And what was Edvard Munch trying to do that was new? How was he an avant-garde artist?
Well, in a way...
Question number two.
Yeah, question number two. In a way, it's not totally new, because really Van Gogh started it.
Right.
But Edvard Munch took Van Gogh's idea about showing people not how things really looked, but how they felt to him, to the nth degree. So he took it to an extreme. Now, I mean, this doesn't look like the real world at all. The characters have become almost cartoonish, and we didn't see that in Van Gogh. So he has taken Van Gogh's original idea and pushed it, and that's what's new about what he has done.
The use of color, the line, the exaggeration of character to express how he was feeling.
Right.
This anger, this screaming.
And this project has become so important in the art world that now it has a name. It's called Expressionism. And Van Gogh never heard that term, although he's considered the father of this movement, the Expressionist movement. Munch is really at the height of it, though, and was familiar with being an Expressionist. The next work of art you're going to see, we're not going to really talk about. We're kind of skipping over some of this, but just so that you know that when you see a work by Edvard Munch, you're always going to know at this point that it's an Edvard Munch painting. I mean, all the figures look like walking dead people.
And it's the same exact location, the same blood red sky. It's on a bridge somewhere.
Right. Okay, the next work that we're going to talk about, which you're responsible for on the test, is on the next page, and it's called Puberty. It shows a young girl looking straight out at the viewer. She's nude. She's sitting on a bed. She has this scary shadow behind her. And this is a really, really good example of Munch's project. Because remember, he's trying to show you not what the girl looked like particularly, but how he felt about this girl.
Right.
And this is kind of interesting because, you know, painting young women who are nude is a really popular thing for male artists to do.
So you celebrate their beauty. You want to, you know, be voyeurs and look and watch. But
right. And yeah, but this girl is not fun to look at all, even though she's nude. And she's not exactly ugly. She's more creepy looking. Would you say?
The expression in her eyes, the fact that she's actually crossing her arms is showing that she feels uncomfortable.
Right.
And she wants to create a distance.
The shadow behind her kind of looks like it's going to take a bite out of her.
Right. So there's definitely a separation, you know. We want to be away from her, step away from her versus be engaged and incorporated within the painting. So,
J-Mo, how do you think Munch felt about this nude young girl?
I kind of feel like he felt pity and or he felt bad for her. Puberty is a time of change, and it's a scary thing.
I think too there's a weird kind of revulsion here. Most artists, when they paint nude young girls, you get this, I mean, they try to make viewers feel like, wouldn't she be nice to touch? You do not want to touch this. So it's an interesting painting because it's so different from most paintings like this.
And that's question number 2. What was he trying to do that was new? Again, he's painting with emotion versus creating or showing what he actually sees.
Right, actually showing a very common scene in the art world, but showing it to you in a really, really different way. Yeah.
Let's take a look at another painting that you're responsible for knowing, and that is the Broken Column.
Yeah, Frida Kahlo is one of those artists where if you don't use the creator to try to understand her artwork, if you don't apply the creator questions, you're not going to get her at all. First one?
Yeah, that's personal. What personal experiences influenced this artwork of the Broken Column? Well, we know that Frida, when she was
basically the same age that our students are.
Oh, wow.
I think a senior in high school. She and her boyfriend had run to catch this bus, and during this time, this is like the 1930s in Mexico, the buses were made largely of wooden parts too, and this driver, like many drivers in Mexico City still to this day, was kind of a crazy driver. And he was trying to pass another vehicle and ended up crashing into a trolley car that pushed them into a wall. And the parts of the bus just basically shattered. And Frida was thrown up into the air. A railing that was beside her actually
thrust inside her.
Right, came up through her groin and it shattered her spine.
Oh.
Yeah, painful to even talk about. So what you see in the painting is her with her shattered spine, and she's kind of made a pun here because her spinal column is a Greek column that you'd see in architecture, but you can see all the cracks in it. And so poor Frida was in pain for the rest of her life after this accident.
Yeah, and you see that pain. You know, you see it in her tears. You could see it maybe even through the nails that, you know, possibly could be represented by the wooden based bus, you know, their nails flying everywhere, glass everywhere. We also could see this corset.
Right, which she actually did have to wear. Her spine, because it was cracked, wouldn't stay straight. And so doctors created for her throughout her life all these corsets that she had to wear, which kept her spine straight. And they were very, very painful.
So her personal experience in this accident you see in a lot of her paintings,
yes,
you know, or at least the result of the accident.
Right, exactly.
You know, for example, where is she located? She's located she put herself in a desert all alone.
And that actually relates to her personal experience too. One of the sad results of her accident was that she was able to become pregnant, but because the inside of her body had been so damaged, within a few months the baby spontaneously miscarried. So she was completely barren. All of her babies miscarried, and she's showing you that by trying to show you this barren landscape. And she's actually gone out of her way to try to draw a parallel between the landscape and her body. And I usually ask the kids if they can figure out what she's done to make you see that the landscape is like her body. Do you see it?
That it's cracked?
It's all cracked. And the cracks are just like the cracks that you see in her spine. To show you how much pain she's in, she's actually showing you herself the way she saw martyrs portrayed in paintings in the Catholic churches that she visited as a little girl.
Right, you have that cloth, the infamous cloth covering her groin, and it's for multiple reasons, obviously. She wants to hide that groin because it's gone through so much pain. But also, I mean, what other famous characters had that cloth?
Well, it looks just like the way Jesus is represented all the time, you know, as he's ascending to heaven. And she's even holding the loincloth the way Jesus or saints would hold it.
The palm up.
So she's equating herself and her suffering to the suffering that Christian martyrs experienced. Saint Sebastian was the martyr who was killed by having all sorts of nails stuck into his body. So.
And a final personal experience that we may want to note in Frida's
can't forget
paintings,
this.
right? Is that beautiful, beautiful unibrow?
Right.
Yeah.
Because Frida said that actually there were two disasters in her life, not just the bus accident, but the second disaster was her marriage to Diego Rivera. Now, we make it sound like it was all negative, but the truth is these two people loved each other passionately, and they also hated each other passionately, frequently. Diego was a very famous painter during Frida's life. Now, today she's just as famous as he was. But in their lifetimes, it was Diego that was the really famous artist, and he painted murals on walls. She met him when he was painting a mural at her high school. And they fell wildly in love. But Diego made it really clear from the beginning that he was not capable of being monogamous. And in fact, he asked her if because he wanted to marry her, he asked her if she thought she could deal with this. And she said, as long as she felt he was loyal to her, that she thought she could.
Well, but besides the fact that he told her that she was beautiful and he wanted her to keep the unibrow, and the reason why he wanted her to keep the unibrow was, I think, I don't know if this is true, but he didn't want anyone else really loving her.
Well, that was her suspicion.
Yeah.
She was much more beautiful than he was. And we're not going to actually spend time looking at the slides in this lecture, but you can see in your book, and we showed pictures in class about what Diego and Frida really looked like. Frida's actually, I think, prettier in real life than she portrays herself to be in her paintings.
Portraits, of course.
Diego, not so pretty. I mean, but the amazing thing about Diego is even though he was not a very attractive man, he literally seduced hundreds of women in his life. And even when he was married to Frida, and the really hard one was he seduced Frida's sister. And she couldn't take that, so she actually left him after he seduced her sister.
That was the edge.
That was bad. They ended up kind of breaking up and getting back together, and breaking up and getting back together a number of times in their life. But yeah, her marriage to Diego was the other source of her suffering.
So we definitely can see her personal experiences just in the broken column. Let's take a look at the Henry Ford Hospital as well, and we see the same reaction to that bus accident and those spontaneous miscarriages.
Yeah. Okay, and this painting in your book is right after the two portraits of Diego and Frida, and it shows Frida lying on a bed, and on the bed it says Henry Ford Hospital, Detroit, and that's because that's where Frida and Diego were at the time she painted this painting. So we're dealing with question, I believe it's 3 here, what was going on in the artist's life when this painting was made. And she's showing you exactly what was going on in her life. I mean, she was pregnant. They were in Detroit. Diego was working for Henry Ford doing murals on the walls of the Henry Ford industrial areas. Murals, by the way, that Henry Ford covered up because they were too pro-communist. But anyway, Frida had a miscarriage while they were there. And it broke her heart every time this happened. And this is the painting that she did right after the miscarriage in the hospital.
All right, let's move on to Caravaggio. All right, this is David with the head of Goliath. You see a young boy with a man's head in his arm.
Right, and for this painting, we probably want to start by saying that the truth is Caravaggio would probably prefer that we not use the creator to interpret this work of art. All he cares about is that you know the biblical story, and you know this is David from the Old Testament, who was a 16-year-old that went out onto the battlefield, and when all the other men, many of whom were bigger and more developed than he was, were afraid to fight, he walked right out to face Goliath, the giant, and using nothing but his slingshot, let loose,
Destroyed.
perfectly hits Goliath. Goliath falls to the ground. You can see the mark on his head there where the rock hit his forehead. Falls to the ground. David then walks over. Goliath's men are probably standing there stunned. You wonder why they didn't come forward and defend him.
Protect them.
Yeah, but they're stunned. David comes walking up, slices off Goliath's head, and in this way the Israelis defeat the army. He goes on to become king. And maybe we should start by talking about Caravaggio's project, what it is that Caravaggio is trying to do. This is question 2.
Question number 2?
Yeah, because this is what makes Caravaggio so famous. So what makes Caravaggio so powerful and what's so new is he's really the first artist.
Real people?
Yeah.
Okay.
To show these biblical characters as real people,
right.
To bring out their humanity. So he doesn't show you this idealized David. He shows you a real kid. His face isn't perfect. He's got this very human expression. He doesn't have a halo above his head. He doesn't look, like he's some saint. He looks like a human being, and that's what Caravaggio is he's really bringing out. And then
did people like that?
They did, for the most part, and even the church leaders who were paying for these portraits, they liked the fact that he's teaching people about these Bible stories in a way that makes it more human. Yeah,
right.
More relatable. Most of the time, I should say, they like it. We're going to talk about how sometimes they didn't too. But that's what Caravaggio is doing that is new. And sometimes, in this painting he doesn't do this, but sometimes he even puts clothes that are from his time period on these religious figures. We don't tend to notice it today because they still look like really old clothes
Still
to us.
seems right.
Yeah, but in Caravaggio's time, it would be like, looking at the disciples today dressed in sweatshirts and jeans.
Yeah, or Shakespeare wearing shades.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Rock on. All right, should we attack the creator?
Yeah, let's attack the creator, even though Caravaggio probably wouldn't want us to.
What was the personal experiences that influenced this artwork? Well, we know that Caravaggio thought of himself kind of as a beast.
Yeah, well, he was. He was a murderer.
He was a murderer. I guess that is beastly.
That's the big
beastly,
one.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy lived wild, and this is the weird contradiction about Caravaggio. He gave us some of the most insightful and sensitive pictures from the Old and New Testament that we have, and yet, so there's something very spiritual about this guy, right? But boy, his regular daily life was wild. I mean, he thought a good time was to go to the bar, get really drunk, get in fights with people. And one time in a fight with some guy at a bar, he actually killed the guy, and then he was running from the law. The church was trying to protect him because he was their favorite painter. It was just a mess. And then on top of that, many people also didn't approve of Caravaggio's sexual exploits. He preferred boys to women. And in fact, the young man that you see here as the model for David was probably one of his lovers.
I've also read that it could be his lover, or also it's a younger version of Caravaggio.
Oh, really?
Yeah, looking at himself. So if you look at that expression, he almost feels pity of who he's become.
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
I mean, there's definitely two different interpretations in the creator world. Maybe it's that lover, who feels really bad for him, or it's, gosh, what have I become? This monster, this murderer, this man who, prefers boys.
Yeah, because the expression on David's face is important, and I think there are layers here. I mean, this is partly what Caravaggio was doing that was new. You don't see David holding up this head and going I'm triumphant.
I am the king. And
yeah, and look what I did. What a man I am. I mean, when I ask the kids to describe the expression on his face, it's an odd expression. It's very human. It's pity. There's thoughtfulness there.
Right.
You can see the makings of somebody who could become the king. Yeah. And then to add a layer onto that maybe this is a younger Caravaggio looking at his older self, too. Who is Goliath?
Well, Goliath is a self-portrait. It's Caravaggio. If you didn't figure that out from our discussion, there it is.
You're looking at Caravaggio's head when you look at Goliath there. And it's an interesting choice on his part because he's showing you that he sees himself as this ugly, brutish monster. Okay, the second Caravaggio painting we want to look at is on the next page. It's the one at the top that shows a woman who is dead. People are kind of crying around her. This is the Dormition of the Virgin, and Dormition just means death scene. For this one, we're going to ask the question. Well, actually,
what was he trying to do?
What was he trying to do, and what was happening at the time that this work was created? And so the main thing he's trying to do is what we talked about before. He's trying to show you the death of the Virgin,
but using real people
and make it totally human. So what you have to understand is normally the Virgin Mary, her death scene was shown in this really idealized way. So she would still look pretty even though she was dead, and she'd have this beautiful halo.
Angelic glow to her.
Yes, and you might even see the angels up above getting ready to come down and pick her up and carry her off to heaven.
But we definitely don't see that here.
No, and here Caravaggio crossed a line because the church did not like this painting. They refused to pay for it. They felt that it was sacrilegious, it was insulting.
He found this model in a river?
Right. I've actually read two different accounts of who the model was. Some people said it was a prostitute friend of his, and the other interpretation, which I read in a different book, was it was actually the drowned body of a prostitute.
That's what I
pulled out of the river, and that's the one I tend to go with because the body looks like something that was pulled out of a river.
Yeah, it's bloated. You could see the water still in the ankles.
Yeah.
And
they're all swollen.
The hands, everything seems very swollen.
Her clothes are really tight against her body because her body is bloated as a result of being dead. So this is a really, really dead Virgin Mary. And, this is part of his goal. He wanted to show things realistically, but, ooh.
He took it too far.
He took it too far, according to the church, anyway. And they were furious that he would represent the Virgin Mary this way. All right. The last one we're going to talk about is Caravaggio's Bacchus. And this is just below the Dormition of the Virgin. You can't really talk about Caravaggio when you just show the religious paintings. This is the other side of what he did. These are the classical mythological images. Bacchus is the god of wine and partying. This is certainly a part of Caravaggio's personality.
And his life and his experience.
Right. We think that this young man was one of his lovers, and certainly this Bacchus is looking at us with what we call a come hither expression.
Is that what his eyes say to you?
That's
what
his, yes.
Come hither?
Come hither.
Come drink my wine.
I'm trying to be a sexy boy, and I am interested in you as I reach out and give you this glass of wine. He's trying to tempt the viewer.
Well,
what question did we answer there, by the way?
That was question number 1. What personal experiences did Caravaggio have?
And his experiences were that he was a partier.
And his interest in boys.
Right. That's it.
Humanities Online.
That's all, folks.